Everyone in the city knew the name Ethan Crowley, not because he smiled often or spoke kindly, but because his name sat atop steel towers, luxury hospitals, private schools, and billion-dollar deals that reshaped skylines overnight. Yet for all his wealth, Ethan Crowley lived in a mansion that echoed with silence, broken only by the soft tapping of tiny hands against walls and the cautious footsteps of three little girls, who had never seen light, color, or their father's face, his triplet daughters, Lily, Rose, and Hope, born into unimaginable privilege and unbearable darkness, blind from birth due to a rare genetic condition no specialist in the world could reverse. And though Ethan spent millions flying doctors from Switzerland, Japan, and the United States, though he donated entire wings to hospitals and funded research labs bearing his name, the verdict never changed. Permanent, they said. And every time he heard that word, it carved something out of his chest that money could not replace. So he buried himself in work, convincing himself that providing the best caregivers, the safest mansion, the most advanced technology was enough. Even as his daughters learned the world by sound and touch alone, counting steps, memorizing voices, feeling warmth without knowing what sunlight looked like. And on one cold autumn afternoon, as Ethan exited his car outside the courthouse after acquiring another company he didn't need, he heard laughter that stopped him cold, small, bright laughter that sounded painfully familiar. And turning, he saw something impossible, his triplets, holding hands, moving freely along the sidewalk under the watch of a nanny, walking toward an old beggar woman sitting near the steps, wrapped in worn coats, her hair gray and tangled, her hands rough and trembling, yet smiling like someone who carried a secret. And before anyone could stop them, the girls let go of each other and ran straight toward her, laughing as if they could see her, as if they knew exactly where she was. While Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs and panic surged through him, his mind screaming that they would fall, collide, get hurt, but they didn't. Not a single step misplaced. Not a stumble, not fear, only joy. And the old beggar opened her arms and whispered softly, words no one else could hear. And when the girls reached her, they froze, then gasped in unison, their tiny fingers tightening, their breathing hitching. And Lily whispered, "Papa, it's bright." And the world seemed to tilt as Ethan rushed forward, his voice breaking as he demanded to know what was happening, the nanny shaking, the crowd gathering. And the old woman slowly lifted her gaze to him, eyes calm, knowing, and said in a voice that carried weight beyond years, "You searched the world for cures but forgot compassion, and today compassion found them." And when Ethan dropped to his knees in front of his daughters, tears streaming as Rose reached for his face and said, "Papa, you have eyes full of water. They shine." His knees buckled, his breath left him, and for the first time in his life, the richest man in the city felt utterly powerless, because standing before him was a miracle no contract could buy, no doctor could explain, and no amount of money could control. And as the old beggar slowly rose to her feet, supported by the girls who moments ago could not see at all, Ethan realized his life, his priorities, and his understanding of wealth were about to change forever. And if you feel your heart racing right now, if you believe miracles can still happen when kindness meets fate, make sure you subscribe to this channel, because what happens next will leave you breathless. Ethan Crowley stood frozen as the city noise faded into a distant hum, his entire universe narrowing to the three small faces in front of him, faces he had kissed every night without ever knowing the color of their eyes. And now Lily's were a clear, trembling blue, Rose's a soft green, and Hope's a deep brown that reflected fear, wonder, and something older than childhood. And as they touched his cheeks again and again, mapping him with sight the way they once had with hands, Ethan broke in a way no courtroom loss or financial collapse had ever managed, sobbing openly as strangers watched the untouchable billionaire crumble on a cold sidewalk, while the old beggar, who now stood straighter, taller somehow, waited patiently, as if she had seen this moment 1,000 times before. And when Ethan finally found his voice, hoarse and shaking, he demanded answers, not with authority but desperation, asking who she was, what she had done, how this was possible. And the woman only smiled gently and said, "First, take your daughters home. They have seen enough fear for one day." And something in her tone made Ethan obey without question, escorting everyone to his mansion where doctors arrived within minutes. Machines beeped, scans ran, experts whispered, in disbelief as test after test confirmed the impossible truth. The triplets' optic nerves were fully functional, healthy, as if they had never been damaged at all. And while the doctors argued and theorized, Ethan sat alone with the old woman in his private study, finally learning her name was Miriam, a name she said softly, like it once meant something important. And she told him a story he had buried long ago, a story of a young, ruthless businessman who had shut down a small community clinic years earlier to make room for a luxury development, ignoring protests, pleas, and one elderly nurse who begged him to reconsider because the clinic served children with rare conditions, including blindness, and Ethan's breath caught as memories resurfaced. Because he remembered that nurse, remembered dismissing her as sentimental and irrelevant, remembered how she lost everything when the clinic closed, and when Miriam met his eyes and said, "I was that nurse," the room seemed to shrink, her voice steady as she explained how she spent years on the streets after the system failed her, yet never stopped believing her purpose wasn't finished, how she prayed not for revenge but for understanding, and how when she saw the triplets that day, something told her their blindness was tied not just to genetics, but to a debt unpaid, a wound unhealed, and she confessed she didn't know how the miracle worked, only that sometimes the world bends when compassion finally catches up to power. And Ethan collapsed back into his chair, realization crushing him as he understood that his daughters had paid the price for choices he made long before they were born, and in that moment he did something no one expected. He signed over half his fortune to rebuild clinics, fund research, house the homeless, and create programs ensuring no child would ever lose sight because profit mattered more than care. And as days passed, the triplets adjusted to a world bursting with color, laughing at sunsets, marveling at flowers, staring endlessly at their father as if memorizing him, while Miriam quietly prepared to leave, believing her role complete. But Ethan stopped her, kneeling before her and asking forgiveness, not as a billionaire, but as a man who finally understood that wealth without humanity was blindness of another kind. And when Miriam placed her hand on his head and forgave him, something else healed too, something unseen, something permanent. And years later, people would speak not of Ethan Crowley the millionaire, but of Ethan Crowley the man who learned to see through the eyes of kindness, a story shared across cities and screens, reminding millions that miracles don't come to those who demand them, but to those willing to change. And if this story moved you, if it made you believe that compassion can rewrite destiny, subscribe to this channel, because every story here is crafted to remind you that hope still walks among us, often disguised as someone the world chose to ignore.